No one really knows what happened when Elvis Presley was about to die, but new details from his immediate family have unveiled the truth we have all been waiting for. Saying the name Elvis already brings up images of dancing hips in everyone's imagination. He's the king of rock and roll, with a voice that could make you melt. Elvis changed music forever. By the time he passed away at the age of 42, he was known as a real one in the music industry. But here's the thing. As the world was swooning over his hits and iconic performances, there was a lot going on behind the scenes. Elvis's life was filled with hidden truths, drama, mystery, and controversy. His final days were not an exception. People have speculated for years about what really happened during those last moments. We're uncovering the truth that everyone's been waiting for. Backstory and rise of fame. Elvis's story starts in the small town of Tupelo, Mississippi, where he was born on January 8, 1935. He grew up in a humble setting. His family did not have much money. Regardless of this, Elvis's parents, Vernon and Gladys Presley, were deeply supportive, and it was clear from an early age that their son was special. Elvis's love for music began in church, an Assembly of God church, where the sounds of gospel influenced his unique style. When Elvis was 13, his family moved to Memphis, Tennessee, in search of a better life. This move turned out to be quite a game changer. Memphis was a melting pot of musical styles, and Elvis absorbed it all. Blues, country, gospel, you name it. This music scene, as vibrant as you could imagine, became the backbone of his sound. Elvis signed with RCA Records and, in 1956, released Heartbreak Hotel. It skyrocketed to #1. More hits followed, like Hound Dog and Jailhouse Rock, each song pushing Elvis further into fame. His music was fresh and exciting, but it was his live performances that really set him apart. Elvis had this way of moving, these famous hip gyrations that drove the young girls wild and got the older folks quite taken aback. His provocative performance style caused a stir. It was quite the thing. On TV shows like The Ed Sullivan Show, producers were so scandalized by his movements that they only filmed him from the waist up. However, the more the establishment pushed back, the more the fans loved him. Provocative performance style. Elvis Presley's on-stage performance style was so great, especially in 1950s American society. When Elvis hit the stage, he didn't just stand there and sing. He moved. And boy, did he move. Those hip movements, his swiveling legs, and general energy were electric. He captured the hearts of teenagers across the country. But not everyone was thrilled. Parents, religious groups, and the media didn't quite know what to make of him. To them, Elvis's moves were scandalous, even sinful. His suggestive dancing was seen as a threat to the moral fabric of society. It wasn't just about the music. It was about what he represented. Something new, a rebellious spirit. He challenged the conservative norms of the time. The backlash was intense. Parents worried that Elvis was corrupting their kids. Religious groups condemned his performances as vulgar and inappropriate. Newspapers and magazines ran articles criticizing his influence, calling him Elvis the Pelvis. One of the most memorable moments of controversy came during Elvis's appearances on national television. His debut on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1956 was definitely something. Apparently, Sullivan had initially vowed never to have Elvis on his show, but Elvis's wild popularity made him reconsider. When Elvis finally performed, the cameras famously only showed him from the waist up to avoid broadcasting his hip movements. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, the performance drew a very interesting audience, over 60 million viewers, which was more than 80% of the television audience at the time. He brought a new level of physicality to rock and roll that nobody had seen before. His performances were a huge part of his appeal. Racial appropriation. When it comes to Elvis Presley, one of the biggest controversies that has surrounded him is the issue of racial appropriation. Elvis is often hailed as the king of rock and roll, but it is common knowledge that the roots of this genre of music run deep in African American culture. Many people argue that Elvis capitalized on musical styles started by black artists. Also, these artists never got the same level of recognition or financial success. Getting into it, Elvis grew up in Tupelo, Mississippi, and later moved to Memphis, Tennessee, both places with rich, vibrant African American musical traditions. It's no surprise that he was heavily influenced by the blues, gospel, and R&B sounds he heard growing up. Artists like B.B. King, Big Mama Thornton, and Arthur Crudup played a big role in shaping his musical style. For example, Elvis's hit Hound Dog was originally recorded by Big Mama Thornton, and That's All Right was a cover of an Arthur Crudup song. Critics argue that Elvis's success was, in part, due to the fact that he brought a traditionally black sound to a wider, predominantly white audience. In the 1950s, racial segregation was still very much a reality in the United States, and black artists were often limited in where they could perform and how their music was distributed. The interesting part is that while black musicians struggled for airtime on mainstream radio stations and faced barriers in the recording industry, Elvis's music was played everywhere. This situation led to accusations of cultural appropriation. Critics say that Elvis, intentionally or not, benefited from a system that marginalized black musicians. At the same time, it elevated a white artist who was essentially performing a similar style of music. They keep saying that many black artists who influenced Elvis never received the same level of fame or financial rewards. Military service. The King of Rock and Roll was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1958. Before heading to basic training, Elvis had a whirlwind few years of non-stop touring, recording, and movie-making. Hits like Heartbreak Hotel, Hound Dog, and Jailhouse Rock had already put him up there with the greats. He was stationed in Fort Hood, Texas for basic training before being deployed to Friedberg, Germany. Elvis's military service was not completely well received by the public. There were rumors and whispers of special treatment. Some speculated that his time in the Army was not as harsh as that of other soldiers. They brought up his ability to live off base occasionally, and the visits he received from his family and friends. After 2 years of service, Elvis returned to the U.S. in 1960, receiving an honorable discharge. However, the music scene had changed in his absence. Rock and roll was evolving, and new artists were emerging. Instead of jumping straight back into the music scene, Elvis focused on his film career. He starred in a series of successful movies that featured soundtracks, keeping him relevant in the music industry while also expanding his brand. He was in films like G.I. Blues and Blue Hawaii. These were commercial successes. Elvis also made a notable return to live performances. His famous 1968 comeback special on NBC showcased a revitalized Elvis, clad in black leather and performing with the same raw energy that got him so popular in the first place. Relationship and marriage. Elvis met Priscilla Beaulieu in 1959 while he was stationed in Germany during his military service. She was only 14 at the time, and Elvis was 24, which raised quite a few eyebrows. The two got married on May 1st, 1967. 9 months later, they welcomed their daughter, Lisa Marie Presley. Despite the outward appearances of a perfect life, their marriage was strained by Elvis's infidelities and his increasing dependency on prescription drugs. In 1972, after several tumultuous years, Priscilla filed for divorce. After his divorce from Priscilla, Elvis's love life continued to be wild. One of the numerous women he dated is Linda Thompson from 1972 to 1976. She spoke about the challenges of being with someone as famous and troubled as Elvis. In the final years of his life, Elvis had a relationship with Ginger Alden. Ginger was with Elvis at Graceland and discovered him unresponsive on the day he died. Their relationship, just like many of Elvis's others, was marked by his declining health and addiction issues. Substance abuse and health issues. Elvis's problems with prescription drugs started in the 1960s. At first, he used them to manage pain and stress, but over time, his use turned into a full-blown addiction. He took amphetamines to stay awake and energized, barbiturates to sleep, and various other drugs to manage pain and anxiety. This dangerous mix began to affect not only his health, but also his performance quality. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, the effects of Elvis's substance abuse were becoming evident. He started gaining weight, his energy levels dropped, and his once electrifying performances began to suffer. Fans noticed he was often bloated and sluggish on stage, a stark contrast to the dynamic performer they had come to love. His deteriorating condition was hard to ignore. Elvis also struggled with a lot of chronic health issues. He had severe gastrointestinal problems, high blood pressure, and liver damage. The weight gain was particularly visible, and it contributed to further health complications. His iconic good looks and stage presence were compromised. By the mid-1970s, his performances were becoming increasingly erratic, and his public appearances showed a man who was visibly unwell. The once invincible king of rock and roll was now struggling to keep it together, both on and off stage. Elvis's battle with substance abuse and health issues came to a tragic end on August 16, 1977, when he was found unresponsive at Graceland. It was widely believed that his extensive drug use and underlying health problems were the cause. His untimely death at the age of 42 shocked the world. That morning, his girlfriend, Ginger Alden, found him unresponsive on the bathroom floor. The official cause of death was a heart attack, but the circumstances surrounding it are not straightforward. In the end, Elvis Presley is known all over the world of music and beyond as a wild icon.